Okay, welcome everyone. Today is the 4th of December 2024. This is Sachin Karnik. We are on part number 7 of the Foundations of Angel Wing technical presentations. I'm going to do just a bit of review in the way I've structured these slides for those who are following along online now, as well as later on, either on YouTube or in some podcast format, is that I've taken the original line from the Foundation's big book, the 813-page book, starting right on chapter 1. Each line is shown in italics, and then there's a commentary on each line. So I'm starting at the first line again as a review, and then we'll kind of go into it and get into further exploration on these ideas. Please remember, this is a technical presentation. It is at a linguistic level that is usually not presented this way, but we are trying to present the more academic, more technical aspects of the concepts that are in the Angel Wing program. So the very first line, which was presented some time back, is that the notion of the self encapsulates an individual positioned at the focal point of their introspective cognition. Right? So this is the line we'll be looking at to begin with. We've looked at this before. I'm going to look at it now in another way and then move ahead from there. So this line introduces the self as the primary axis of introspection, establishing its central role in how individuals engage with and understand their inner cognitive world. The self functions as a lens through which personal experiences are perceived, highlighting the importance of subjective experience in shaping reality. By situating the self as the focal point of cognition, this perspective underlines the inexorable connection between self-awareness and the construction of individual identity. This positioning forms the basis for analyzing how internal and external realities intersect within human consciousness, paving the way for exploring deeper layers of psychological and philosophical inquiry into the mind. All right, so this was the first line. I'm not going to talk too much about this now. I don't want to repeat what was already there, so I'm going to move to the second one. This is a quick review. Subjectivity and prejudiced perception. So the original line is as follows. It's imperative to acknowledge that the comprehension of the self is inherently prejudiced as it epitomizes a subject's intrinsic reference to its own existence. We've talked about this before. Here's a brief commentary. And that statement is a reference from Damasio, 2012. This statement highlights the intrinsic subjectivity that colors our understanding of the self. Rooted in individual experiences, the perception of the self is unavoidably biased, as it stems from one's own consciousness and cannot escape the limitations of personal perspective. Damasio's insight draws attention to the epistemological challenge of studying the self. The observer and the observed are intertwined. This recognition is pivotal for both scientific and philosophical frameworks, seeking to decode consciousness, emphasizing the need for methodologies that account for the self-referential nature of introspective cognition. So I'm going to move on. Okay, the next line is about the unique internal self. So the line is as follows. This biased perception is predicated on the idea that each individual holds a unique internal view of themselves. Here's the commentary. The commentary is as follows. This line reinforces the idea that self-perception is unique, shaped by personal cognitive, emotional, and experiential frameworks. It underscores the singularity of self-awareness, where each individual's internal view becomes an exclusive narrative of identity and existence. Such uniqueness is vital in fields like psychology and phenomenology, as it highlights the diversity of human experiences, while also presenting challenges in constructing universal models of selfhood. This internal perspective, thus, not only reflects individuality, but also frames how humans relate to the broader social and existential context. So I'm going to make some comments on this. I know we've talked a little bit about this before, but again, the more we probe into these concepts and ideas, the further there is going to be within our mental modality clarity about the original line that was written or that is written in the Foundations book. So the first point here is that self-perception is unique. It is shaped by personal, cognitive, emotional, and experiential frameworks. Well, what does that mean? Self-perception, when I see myself, I'm trying to see who I am. There is uniqueness in that perception. Sachin Karnik is a unique individual. There is a specific type of very special personality, personal reality that exists. And that self-perception, meaning my ability to perceive who I am, my capacity to reflect on me, my ability to perceive myself is unique, point number one. Point number two, that ability, that self-perception that is possible or that I do have is shaped by personal cognitive frameworks. What does that mean? See, that's why this is pretty heavy stuff. You have to really break it down very carefully. When I am trying to perceive myself, I can only do so in such a way that self-perception gets shaped by my personal, cognitive, emotional, and experiential frameworks. I cannot perceive my mind, the reality of my inner world, or the reality of my identity without personal cognitive frameworks, personal emotional frameworks, and without personal experiential frameworks. Another way to put that is that my capacity, my ability to perceive me, meaning my psychological sense of who I am, is only possible when there are personal cognitive frameworks, emotional and experiential frameworks. Those frameworks are part of the schema structure. Okay, yes, so to continue further here, these frameworks are part of, or they are considered to be our psychological schemas. Now, there's a whole psychological set of theories regarding schemas, but these are the patterns that are within our brain, our mind, that create our sense of who I am. So there is a personal cognitive framework within all of us. I have my thoughts, my cognitive meaning my thinking that's going on, the intelligence that's there, the thinking power that's there, that exists within me. That's a cognitive framework. And so when I try to see who I am, I can only see who I am through the lens, or it is shaped, meaning the self-perception is shaped through the lens of the personal cognitive framework. The word framework there refers to my own psychological, neuropsychological structure that exists in the brain, in the mind, and it is through that structure that self-perception is possible, and that is why it is unique. You see how much is in this one line only. We have to really carefully break it down. So when I'm trying to discover who I am, there's awareness of the fact that I have a personal framework. There has to be awareness of the fact that there's an emotional framework. And the word framework means structure. We've talked about this before in other programs. We'll talk about it here also. The quality, quantity, direction, dimension, depth, and structure. And the word framework here refers to structure, the structure of the mind, essentially. But if you break that down further, there is an experiential structure. There is an experiential framework, meaning all my experiences I've had, they're stored within my mind as memories and whatnot, and they all build a framework within which my identity is built. And so when I try to see myself, there is bias. And that's the point of the original line. The original line is this biased perception is predicated on the idea that each individual holds a unique internal view of themselves. And why is it biased? Go to the previous line. It is imperative to acknowledge that the comprehension of the self, in quotes, is inherently prejudiced, as it epitomizes a subject's intrinsic reference to its own self. Now, I hope this is clear. In our 7th week, I hope this point is really clear that to see oneself, there is bias. And that's what's interesting about this. We can give it lip service and talk about it, but to really thoroughly grasp the power of this reflective process, we can see that self-reference is the key here, that we refer to ourselves again and again. So it underscores the singularity of self-awareness, where each individual's internal view becomes an exclusive narrative of identity and existence. We definitely have an exclusive narrative. Narrative is our own. It's there. It's like a story. Right from birth until the present moment, there is an exclusive narrative. The narrative is part of the identity. It's a narrative of identity also. It's a narrative within which the identity works, and it's a narrative within which the identity is formed. See, it's very, very intricate. These ideas are extraordinarily intricate. Right? So each individual's internal view, meaning when I try to see myself and my view of who I am from an introspective attempt, when I try to see myself, my view of who I am, that view becomes an exclusive narrative. I start to talk within my mind about who I am. That narrative of my identity of who I am. I am Sachin, I am this, I am that, I like this. I have an internal narrative that I present to myself based on my own individual internal view. Or when I try to see myself internally, there is this narrative that comes into the picture. So there's an exclusive narrative of identity, and there is an exclusive narrative of existence. Both are the case. Exclusive narrative of existence. I was born November 13th, 1970 in India, in this place. And then, my existence has an exclusive narrative. I went to elementary school at this place, middle school. My existence, every experience is within the realm of existence. So experience, identity, and existence are all together. So this is the uniqueness. So such uniqueness is vital in the fields like psychology and phenomenology, as it highlights the diversity of human experiences while also presenting challenges in constructing universal models of selfhood. Right? So the point here is that uniqueness is there. We need to have uniqueness. We have it, in fact. It's discussed substantially in psychology in thousands of ways, and in phenomenology, which is the first-person subjective experiential study, the direct study of the first-person qualitative experience, that is phenomenology. So such uniqueness highlights the diversity of human experiences. We all have our own experiences. It's diverse, but also presents challenges in constructing universal models of selfhood. How do researchers or theoreticians, or like in angel wing, how can we construct a model of what the self is actually all about, the psychological self or even the spiritual self or whatever we want to say about it? Can we say that that it's possible to construct a universal model of what the self is actually all about? Like, for example, in the Vedanta tradition, the self, it's talked about as the Atman, as the spirit, as something, as consciousness, as one. It's universal, it's trans-universal. That's how that's talked about. Okay. But when we are referring to the psychological self, is it possible to construct a universal model, or is there so much uniqueness that the universal model cannot be actually constructed? We can just dabble in it a bit. You really cannot find universal principles. Is that the case? Or is it the case that no, there are universal principles that are underlyingly the same amongst all, just the expressions of those principles varies? So that is probably what it is. But one has to probe into that. So this internal perspective, thus, does not only reflect individuality, but also frames how humans relate to the broader social and existential context. Of course, my own perspective of who I am, it reflects my uniqueness, my individuality. Yes, of course. But this perspective also frames meaning it gives me the purview of how to relate to the broader social and existential context. How do I relate to people in society, people in the family? That is due to my perspective, my internal perspective of myself that reflects my relationship to the society, to the family, to existence itself. Without an internal perspective, I cannot relate to anybody. So this internal perspective thus not only reflects individuality. Does it reflect individuality? Yes. But it does more than that. It also frames how Sachin here, as a human being in the human form, can relate in the broader societal context, the social context, the family context, the national context. For example, the election we just had right now. Let's look at some examples of all this stuff. Take this very controversial and very contested election, maybe not so controversial, but more contested election, right? And although Mr. Trump won straight out, people who voted, for example, they voted based on their perception of themselves and how they relate to that social context and the existential concern about the country, let's say. Right? So when we perform any action, all of these factors come into the picture. Our cognitive frameworks, our emotional frameworks, experiential frameworks, they come into the picture. They are present all the way through. And as a result, we are able to interact with each other, with ourselves also, due to this type of self-bias. Interestingly enough, without that self-bias, can we even interact? Is there any uniqueness without that? The researchers that I've referenced here would say that in their theories, there is uniqueness due to self-bias, or self-bias plays a major role in the construction of that uniqueness. I know this is a little heavy, but anyway, all right. It is 7:25. I don't want to overcomplicate this. Let me go into just one more point here, next 5 minutes, and then we'll open it up for contemplation. Anchoring in experience and emotion. The original line is as follows, and these lines are in the PDF that's available for everyone to read on the Foundations of Angel Wing. The original line is as follows. It's anchored in the personal experiences. What is anchored? That self biased perception. Okay, that's what that's referred to. Biased perception is anchored in personal experiences, cognitive processes, and emotional responses that shape one's understanding of their distinctiveness. The notion that self-awareness is anchored in individual experiences and emotional responses speaks to the intricate interplay between cognition and affect in constructing identity. Identity is constructed through cognition and our affective, our emotional world together. That's part of how identity is constructed. Personal experience provides the raw material, while cognitive processing and emotional resonance weave these into coherent self-perceptions. This dynamic underscores, so this coming together of all these pieces underscores the integral role of memory, emotion, and reasoning in creating a sense of self, providing a rich framework for exploring how self-identity evolves over time and across contexts. So there's a lot involved in that. It's like all the raw material is experience, but that raw material is coming into the brain, into the mind, cognition and memory, as well as emotion. All of that is present in the construction, in the weaving together of coherent self-perceptions. I can see myself in a coherent way. That formation of a coherent sense of who I am, identity that is constructed carefully, is through all of these different ways of really pulling together the emotional, the cognitive, the experiential, and it builds who I am. And if that didn't build that way, we wouldn't be able to function as human beings. So that's why it says here that this dynamic underscores the integral role of memory, emotion, and reasoning in creating a sense of self. If memory is not functioning, there's a damage to that. Sense of self is damaged. People who have a lot of emotional trauma, sense of self is also not very healthy. It can also be damaged. If there's problems in reasoning and in the ability to see myself and integrate my knowledge and all that, my sense of self also gets damaged. Right? So the brain keeps doing this. It forms this sense of self, and in doing so, there is self-identity that evolves over time. It evolves over time. It doesn't just happen at one shot, in one shot. The self-identity evolves over time and across contexts.